And for those online, as I said, you have uh, I've shared the material. So we are talking about the canons of the church, um, which is always a controversial topic because everybody wants to quote the canons as if they mean anything,
Like the Roman Catholic.
like the Roman Catholics. So first of all, what are the canons of the church? They are not weapons of war. They are just rules. Canon law is a tradition of canonical legislation which governs Orthodox church life. It touches on every area of church life, including ecclesiology, liturgy, and ethics. Although generally referred to as canon law, it is more correctly referred to in the Orthodox community as the tradition of the holy canons. This law, the canonical tradition, involves persons who are invested with authority, such as bishops, enabled with the means of creating, formulating, interpreting, executing, validating, amending, and revoking these laws through synodical or conciliar action. In essence, I, as a priest, don't really get to interpret the canons. Lay people specifically don't get to, unless you're a professor of canon law, interpret the canons. The bishop is the canon. What the bishop says is what you do. I had a baptism very early on. I was not ordained yet, but I was a lay assistant in Belmont, and the bishop was a bishop was not our metropolitan, but a bishop from Greece came, and I said, I pulled out my book, and Father Peter grabbed my book and said, "Put that away." Why? He says, "Because we don't know what he's going to do, and whatever he does, you do." I mean, so however he directs it is how that service was going to take place, and that's what you do. So, um, in essence, you need to have a bishop to interpret the canons because, and you'll see this as you go through. The biggest problem that we have is people want to pound you over the head with the canons. Well, the canons say X. Again, it's not for you to interpret or to give.
So basically, it means it can go as bad as this, or it can go below anything that the bishop chooses to go below.
The bishop can choose, in essence, and remember, so the book that contains the canons is called in Greek the Pedalion, in English translated as the rudder, right? So it's the rudder of a ship. A rudder does not provide propulsion, so it doesn't get you anywhere. All it does is it's the steering, right? And if you're on course, do you need to steer? No. It's only when you're off course that you need the rudder to change your direction. And so the canons are only really used in times of needing for correction. So, um, so again, and the bishop is the one who needs to do that. So the train tale, two people meet on a train. After some introductory chat, they discover both are Orthodox and of Russian descent. Vladimir, are you old calendar or new calendar? Old calendar. Very good. Do you have a 3-hour vigil in church every Saturday night and before every holy day, even if the holy day is on a Monday? Of course. Excellent. Does your church have pews or no pews? No pews. Is your priest clean shaven or bearded? He has a beard. Does he wear his cassock and cross in the street, or is he in a suit? He is always in his cassock. Is your jurisdiction ecumenist or non-ecumenist? Non-ecumenist. Do you have a Holy Trinity icon with God the Father depicted as an old man? Yes, we do. Aha, I knew you were a heretic. And this is how we use the canons. Everything was fine up until that one little thing. And then, even in the Russian tradition, how many agios do you do at the end of the doxology? Is it 2 or 3?
3.
Should be 3. We do 2. Does that mean we did it wrong? No. That's the tradition that we have here. But that's what people will argue about, as if that makes any difference, right? Okay. Canons are not new. They're not something that, are a modern phenomenon. They go back to the apostles. And so I have given you some canons. We're going to go through some of the canons. I've only picked out a few. There are over 1,000 canons. Okay, so I have read them all. Yes.
Were most of them in place in the second and third centuries?
No, we'll read through some of these. Some of them are in the 8th century.
All right,
So
but early on.
yeah, I mean, well, the apostolic canons are from the apostolic era, right?
Okay, all
Not
right.
to derail or anything. So in regards to the bishops or a bishop, particularly when you have a bishop that is what church might refer to as controversial, in a way you might look at it that way. Would it not be that the bishops would refer to the canon laws about how the situation is to be addressed, or
Well,
is that what the canon law really would come into it? Because
no, a bishop has the right to administer his diocese the way he chooses. That actually is in the canons, and other bishops cannot interfere with that. So those are part of the canons.
how do you correct a bishop that has gone astray?
A bishop that has gone astray must be corrected by other bishops in a synod. It can't be one bishop saying, "My opinion of you is you're doing something wrong." That's just a conflict between two bishops.
Oh,
It actually has to be a canon or a council of bishops that in synod that corrects another bishop.
okay, so a controversial bishop does no good for another bishop to talk to him. It's just gather everybody up and then you have to address it.
He can talk to him. I mean, maybe he can speak to him as a brother and deal with whatever there is there. But as far as chastising or disciplining another bishop, it can't be done by one bishop can't do that to another bishop. So yeah,
So then why do you, it's just different than that. You always hear people say, well, that's non-canonical.
this is what I'm getting at is to whom? Um, you know, we all know at Christmas time, the Metropolitan insists that we do a Christmas Day liturgy. Okay. And he has given us his blessing to do Christmas Eve liturgy as well, when it's not on Sundays. Um, Technically, we're not supposed to do two liturgies in one day, but he's given us the blessing. It's his prerogative to do that. And it was strange the first time I did it, but it's not my call. It's the bishop's call. So we do it like that. So that's just the way it is. So yes.
So when was it decided that you couldn't have two liturgies in one 24-hour period? And why?
And the Catholics do it.
Catholics do. I don't know when, but
Way
the
back.
early church,
And so, and what is the reasoning?
you only need the Eucharist once. Jesus is enough once. He is sufficient.
But there are some churches that, like, I know this, I can't remember, if it's, I guess it's probably in Houston, where they have two liturgies.
They'll have two
In
liturgies
Orlando, they have two liturgies.
done by
and they have
different
on
priests,
Different priests.
different
and a
altars,
table,
different
different
animatia. Correct.
So as long as the antinucio is different, then the
Correct.
altar could be used.
So one
Correct.
priest can do one liturgy.
Correct. And that's what happens because you have
But I
two.
mean, it's sometimes even, it's like sometimes right now is tomorrow because it's after sunset, but then sometimes it's not.
Right.
But I think that goes with the dimension of time not being linear.
Right.
Especially for God.
It does, and things like Christmas, it is a pastoral issue.
Because we didn't have, I've been in this metropolis for my entire life, except for 2 years. And until His Eminence,
Correct.
Metropolitan Nicholas said, do it on Christmas Day. It never happened.
I think I did it one time in Santa Barbara and realized that very, very, very few people were going to come Christmas Day. They all came the night before. So, but then there's things like a Sunday where, sorry, folks, this is just the way the calendar falls. So there were apostolic canons, again, from the apostolic era, Canon 9. All the faithful who come in and hear the scriptures, but do not stay for the prayers and Holy Communion are to be excommunicated as causing disorder in the church.
Wow, what?
Yeah.
That's harsh.
So it's kind of the opposite of what we do. You know, we come late and we don't hear the scriptures, but we say for communion and the prayers. But this canon, clearly there was an issue in the early church where people would come and hear the readings and then they go get their coffee or something and leave.
It was probably very disruptive.
And which of course is that way. Now, it's there is movement in Greece in the churches much more than there is here. And I tell the story, you know, when I was living there 25 years ago now, a lot more people smoke than they do now. And so right after the gospel was read and as typically a deacon or whatever was carrying it back to the priest, there was a mad rush of mostly men leaving, going out front and cigarette break. They got their cigarette break and, you know, puffing, but normally they were back in time for the creed. So, you know, these things do happen. I do not encourage that. Canon 39. Let not the presbyters or deacons do anything without the sanction of the bishop, for he it is who is entrusted with the people of the Lord, and of whom will be required the account of their souls. So how far does this go back? Well, Saint Ignatius, right, of Antioch, do nothing without the bishop, right? So it's within that framework of things. And by the way, just like any law, you only write a law because it was a problem at the time.
Mhm.
So if you think that this was not happening, there's reasons been written down. Canon 51, if any bishop, presbyter, or deacon, or any one of the sacerdotal list abstains from marriage or flesh or wine, not by way of religious restraint, but as abhorring them, forgetting that God made all things very good, and that he made man and male and female, and blaspheming the work of creation, let him be corrected or else be deposed and cast out of the church, in like manner a layman. Should be noted at that time, even bishops could be married. And essentially, this was an issue with Gnosticism. Gnostics believed that any flesh was evil, and so marrying was not a good thing. And so they were doing it because they felt that the flesh was bad. No, if it's for religious reasons, that's one thing. If it's just because you think things are bad, that's not a good situation. And then 53, if any bishop, presbyter, or deacon does not on festival days or feast days partake of flesh and wine from an abhorrence of them, but not out of religious restraint, let him be deposed, as being seared in his own conscience and being the cause of offense to many. What that means is when you're not fasting, you should not be fasting.
Darn it.
When you're fasting, you fast. When you're not supposed to fast, you're not supposed to fast.
Unless you're doing it for,
Religious
like
reasons.
if you're a monk or a
Correct.
nun or,
Correct. So you're supposed to feast on feast days and fast on fast days. So, then the last canon of the apostolic that I have here, but if a man be deaf or blind, he may not be made a bishop, not indeed as if he were thus defiled, but that the affairs of the church may not be hindered. So just a matter of practicality, that you have to be able to sign things, do things, hear things. A couple of weeks ago, 3 Sundays ago, apparently I had a sinus infection. I woke up that morning, I couldn't hear. I was all, and doing liturgy was a challenge because I couldn't hear myself, let alone the choir. So, you just hope that you're on point with your
we didn't
chanting.
notice. We didn't notice, don't you worry.
That's a good thing. So,
Well, it doesn't matter.
I
Everyone
can't hear
just
him.
roll. Just roll with it doesn't matter. Just roll with whatever Father's doing.
Whatever
Because
you
it's short, cut
do.
it short. That's how it rolls.
I do know of a priest, I think he's now passed away, but in his elderly years, he couldn't hear. So when it came time for the petitions and things, he figured choir should be done by now, so I'm going to start the next set of petitions. So, so it was just kind of when chanting was kind of like, do what you can. Should be noted, canons typically, kind of like councils, the rules are undone by later councils of the same level, right? So a parish council cannot undo an ecumenical council canons, whether we like it or not. It just can't happen. So the highest canons are those from the ecumenical councils. We had 7 of them. We do have canons from all of them. And so these are the first one. I gave you how many canons were listed in each of these councils, but we're not going to go through every one, obviously. I just picked out a few of them of interest. Canon 1, if anyone in sickness has been subjected by physicians to a surgical operation, or if he has been castrated by barbarians, let him remain among the clergy. But if anyone in sound health has castrated himself, it behooves that such a man, if enrolled among the clergy, should cease from his ministry, and that from henceforth no such person should be promoted. But if it is evident that this is said of those who willfully do the thing and presume to castrate themselves, so if any have been made eunuchs by barbarians or by their masters, and should otherwise be found worthy, such men can admit to the clergy. One has to wonder why that's the first canon.
Seems to be a big problem.
Clearly, it was a problem.
Man, why would you do that anyway?
Right.
So this was an issue. Now, obviously, again, the first council was in 325. Edict of Milan was 313. So we had a 12-year period. There could have been somebody in slavery that had this happen to them, and they're saying if it was done to them unwillingly, and they're of sound character, then they can remain clergy. But if they're doing that just to prevent the temptations or whatever, it's not a valid reason.
And that they can still become clergy.
Yeah, if it was not of their own volition.
I wonder if a vasectomy would have been under that as well.
Yes.
Don't know. I don't think so.
Well,
I
I mean,
don't
like
think so,
back
but-
then, I know they
Yeah.
couldn't have done that, but I just wonder.
I don't-
They probably could have.
So, but yeah. So that's an interesting. That is the first canon.
Well, it's like you think about, there's still things that people do, like self-mutilation to
Mhm.
show their allegiance to whomever it is that they're trying to show their allegiance to.
Self-flagellant.
So, you think, because wasn't there a time when Paul kind of has to make a correction in how he talks about marriage, and he said, for me, I don't even know where this is, but I think he says somewhere along, for me, this is my choice. I'm
Mhm.
not married. I'm not going to marry. But that's not for everybody.
Right.
Because if it was, like how you said that all some of the people who wanted to be martyrs were running to martyrdom. It's like,
Right.
everybody can't be killed, because then you have nobody.
Some people are called to Some people are called to celibacy. Not everybody. And so if you're not called to celibacy, then get married. So, absolutely. Canon 13, concerning the departing, the ancient canonical law is still to be maintained, to wit, that if any man be at the point of death, he must not be deprived of the last and most indispensable viaticum. But if anyone should be restored to health again, who has received the communion when his life was despaired of, let him remain among those who communicate in prayers only. But in general, in the case of any dying person whatsoever asking to receive the Eucharist, let the bishop, after examination made, give it to him. What that means is, if you've been excommunicated for whatever reason, on your deathbed, you are still to receive the sacraments. Okay, it should not be withheld from you in that case. If you survive and are restored, you may have to go back. In those days, if you were out of communion, you had to be in the narthex. Okay, so you couldn't even enter into the nave of the church. So that's kind of what that's alluding to there, in prayer, communicating prayers only. But even to this day, if somebody calls me at the hospital, yes, I can give them the sacraments.
Even if they haven't been coming to the church for a long time.
Correct.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So,
Don't get to pray for them though.
Oh.
yes.
Sure.
Canon 15, on account of the great disturbance and discords that occur, it is decreed that the custom prevailing in certain places contrary to the canon must wholly be done away, so neither bishop, presbyter, nor deacon shall pass from city to city. And if anyone after this decree of the Holy and Great Synod shall attempt any such thing, or continue in any such course, his proceedings shall be utterly void, and he shall be restored to the church for which he was ordained bishop or presbyter. In essence, what that means is, I am the priest of Memphis, Tennessee, and the surrounding area. I cannot go into Little Rock, Arkansas, and be a priest there unless I have the permission of the priest there to do so. I certainly can't go from metropolis to metropolis without the bishop's approval. Okay, and this is true. This is kind of what we were alludes to what we were talking about earlier with bishops. Metropolitan Nicholas can't just go to San Francisco and do a service there because his friend is there or family is there. You have to have the permission of the bishop. So there's order, and there's letters that you have to write and things like that. But it just keeps order within the church that the priest in that area stays in that area. Okay.
So how many letters have to happen for the St. George's and St. John's and us to get together for Sunday of Orthodoxy?
We don't do that one. We don't do letters for that. The bishops are just generally aware that we have that practice. But there has been times that I've had to, if Father Basil served for me in December, didn't have to this time, but previous times I've had to have them get a letter from their bishop and have that letter sent to our bishop, just so he doesn't know who the priest is, he wants to know who the priest is. So when I went to California for the wedding that weekend, I had to write a letter to my metropolitan to get permission to leave Memphis. I had to write a letter to the Metropolitan Erasmus of San Francisco to enter into his metropolis and do the service. So it's a little bit of formality. It's a lot easier today with email.
I was gonna say, is it really a letter or just?
No, it's a full letter, but
But you send it on the, okay.
but it's much easier communication now instead of in those days,
You had to write a letter.
mail could have been,
Yeah, lots of hit time.
Does
So-
that also mean even when you're just traveling and not doing any ministry, you guys have to ask? permission?
depends on the situation. Like when I go to Greece, I've never actually gotten permission just per se because that's kind of the process there.
Mhm.
But I'm not being a priest there,
Mhm.
so I'm not I'm not getting the notice of the church and hierarchy there that what's this priest doing here that's we don't know who he is. But vacations, yeah, I do, just because I go to church on Sunday and I'm not going to walk into another priest's church without paperwork and say, hey, I'm here. So
So the other churches here, they're under different metropolitans?
yes, so they're under different bishops. So St. John's is under the Antiochian Metropolitan and St. George's is under the OCA Metropolitan.
Chipotle,
So
Saba.
They're in different archdioceses.
yeah, different archdioceses.
I have no idea what that
Very insightful.
Just under different bishops.
Mhm.
So
They answer to a different authority.
And
yes,
it's like we're under the Patriarch of Constantinople. St. John's is under the Patriarch of Antioch.
Antioch.
And St. George's is
OCA.
under the not Patriarch, I guess, or the Archbishop.
The
Because there's
Metropolitan
that
yeah,
out in the,
in DC.
because that's the, it's funny because they have the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Then you have the Russian Orthodox Church, and then you have the Orthodox Church of America.
Yeah.
So-
It's
Well, that's a little
confusing.
confusing.
It's confusing. So the next
Same
one,
faith.
yeah, exactly. That's why we can serve together.
Like if you were in Cleveland, there would be a Romanian Orthodox church there.
Mhm.
There'd be,
Might be a
maybe
Serbian.
Albanian, Serbian.
Yeah.
There's a bunch like Chicago, but here you don't have so many.
No. Next one, Canon 18. It has come to the knowledge of the Holy and Great Synod that in some districts and cities, the deacons administer the Eucharist to the presbyters, whereas neither canon nor custom permits that they who have no right to offer should give the body of Christ to them that do offer. And this also has been made known that certain deacons now touch the Eucharist even before the bishops, that all such practices be utterly done away, and let the deacons remain within their own bounds, knowing that they are ministers of the bishop and the inferiors of the presbyters. Let them receive the Eucharist according to their order after the presbyters, and let either the bishop or the presbyter administer to them. Furthermore, let not the deacons sit among the presbyters, for that is contrary to canon and order. And if after this decree anyone shall refuse to obey, let him be deposed from the diaconate. A lot going on there
Yeah.
for deacons. In essence, there's ranks of clergy. Bishops are the highest rank, presbyters, priests are the middle rank, deacons are the lowest rank. What they're saying is deacons were giving communion to the presbyters, which is not what should happen. The presbyters should be giving it to the deacons. And so they're just correcting that. And when a bishop is present, he gives it to the priests. We don't commune ourselves in that way. The highest ranking clergy commune themselves, and then they commune the rest of the people beneath them. So it's just maintaining that order. And then the last part of it, a deacon shouldn't even be sitting in the presence, certainly not of a bishop, but even in the presence of a priest, a deacon should not be sitting. So maintaining the order and rank there.
There must have been some uprisings of deacons
Yeah.
saying,
Uppity deep.
You need to be able
A little too big for the pants.
Yeah. But what's let them know, remain within their own bounds,
Yeah.
stay in your lane, bro.
Yeah.
that must have been a big problem.
It clearly was an issue. Canons because of penalties. You know how serious an issue was by how serious the penalties are. It's not just, oh, let them be suspended or whatever. No, let them be deposed. No more deacon. Canon 24, as much as there are certain persons who kneel on the Lord's day and the days of Pentecost, therefore, to the intent that all things may be uniformly observed everywhere in every parish, it seems good to the Holy Synod that prayer be made to God standing. So this is and has been an issue, I guess, in this parish from time to time. Should we kneel on Sunday? And of course, speaking of Sunday of Orthodoxy, all of our parishioners are going to kneel. The others are going to all stay standing. This canon kind of deals with that sort of thing. So anyway, it's not a new issue.
Well, our church is independent, so like, I don't know.
But notice again, it doesn't require any discipline. It just simply says it seems good to the Holy Synod that prayer should be made to God standing. Just a recommendation.
Well, they could have said, everybody kneel.
Correct.
I think if you look at it's human nature to look and say, well, clearly I'm more pious than they are because I'm kneeling. And they probably got tired of hearing it and said, okay, let's just make it one way or the other, and we're going to stand.
Correct. Very simple.
So did they stand? Did they stand on weekdays? Or they
Just said
just
the
stood
Lord's Day.
on the Lord's Day,
On the
but
Lord's
it doesn't
Day.
say what to do on the other days.
You kneel on the other days. Yes. So as I mentioned, there were other canons of other councils. Council of Ankara had 25 canons, canon 10 from there. They who have been made deacons declaring when they were ordained that they must marry, because they were not able to abide so, and who afterwards have married shall continue in their ministry, because it was conceded to them by the bishop. But if any were silent on this matter, undertaking their ordination to abide as they were, and afterwards proceeded to marriage, these shall cease from the diaconate. Bottom line is, you have to be married before you're ordained. The only exception this was given was for a deacon, if he told the bishop, I plan to be married, wish to be married, but either he doesn't have a potential spouse yet or whatever. If the bishop gave him the blessing, but I need you as a deacon now, and ordained him, he can then later on get married. But if he didn't do that, so we as clergy, once you're ordained, you can no longer marry.
So have they gotten more strict about that particular rule?
Yes.
Now it's like
I don't think they really
non-negotiable.
allow that anymore.
It's like the bishop says, "Oh, I'm going to allow it," and then all the other bishops get together like, no, yeah.
Yeah. So, Council of Neo-Caesarea had 15 canons, and the first one, if a presbyter marry, let him be removed from his order, but if he commit fornication or adultery, let him be altogether cast out, i.e. excommunicated, and put to penance. So pretty serious discipline there for straying outside the marriage. Canon 11, let not a presbyter be ordained before he is 30 years of age, even though he be in all respects a worthy man, but let him be made to wait, for our Lord Jesus Christ was baptized and began to teach in his 30th year. And that's still later on canons, 25 for deacons, 30 for priests, 35 for bishops. We don't always follow that. Then again, they didn't always follow it either. St. Athanasius was a deacon at 18 years of age. So There you go.
Yeah, he's also in Egypt. So.
Yes.
No, but they were all they were under these same canons, right?
Yes, but I mean, not necessarily. This was of Neo-Caesarea, so this would have been Asia Minor area, but they were not creating something here in this canon. They were following a practice that was generally followed.
So since all of these were from a different council,
Mhm.
so you say, well, this is from Neo Caesarea.
That was
they
more of
might-
a regional council, not an ecumenical one.
Okay,
That makes
so
sense.
it's like federal law, state law.
Correct.
You had said at one time that a man had to be 30 years of age before he could own property and things like that, be considered a grown man.
That was sort of Jewish tradition.
That was a Jewish use. Is this, you think, coming from that?
I think it was more of that was how society was in those days in general. I mean, men 18 was kind of the age that you went into the military or whatever. So after a couple of years of military and now you're in your 20s, now you have to be an apprentice to learn a occupation. It took you some time to get to a point where, you know, it took you some time so you could, be
Independent.
yeah. I mean, independent is a good word. Member of society that you're contributing without, being underneath somebody. So
So we have to follow these regional ones?
you follow what your bishop tells you to follow. I give these as examples of what was going on in those times, how the church sees certain things. So, and then the Council of Gangra had 20 canons. The first one, if anyone shall condemn marriage or abominate and condemn a woman who is a believer and devout and sleeps with her own husband as though she could not enter the kingdom of heaven, let him be anathema. Again, it seems to be one of those issues. And again, the Gnosticism was prevalent in those days. And so this idea that the physical body was gross and evil and kind of permeated the church a little bit. So Canon 13, if any woman under pretense of asceticism shall change her apparel and instead of a woman's accustomed clothing shall put on that of a man, let her be anathema. So again, just identifying the sexes as they are. What is interesting is we do have several saints, women who basically entered a male monastery and did just that and lived their life, and they didn't find out that she was a woman until after her death.
They had to
So,
marry her, yeah.
so these things, like I say, the canons are not always followed. They're not literal. This is why we can't, quote the canons to somebody and tell them, you're uncanonical.
Or they clearly had something going on at that time
Correct.
that had to be addressed.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
I guess if you think when people started driving cars on the road.
Right.
They probably had to make a lot of different laws to say,
Exactly.
don't do this, drive on this side, drive on that side.
Exactly.
It's like the Marine Corps. We got so many stupid rules. Well, if something happened that made that rule necessary.
Mhm.
Correct.
Why do we gotta wake up at this time? You can thank somebody or
Exactly.
someone.
Exactly.
What is an English word for anathema?
Anathema.
I know.
Anathema.
I mean, that's just,
Excommunication is what that means. Yeah,
okay,
they're no longer even, you can't even talk to them anymore.
they just no longer exist.
Correct. And then what is that? The 18th canon, if anyone under pretense of asceticism shall fast on Sunday, let him be anathema. Okay.
Pretense.
So if
Saying,
you're really an
I'm-
ascetic, it's
I'm,
okay.
yeah, I'm doing it because, I'm being religious, so it's on pretense. So. Council of Antioch had 25 canons. No stranger shall be received without letters pacifical. So that's what kind of I referred to as the letters that clergy have to do. I still do this. If somebody moves away, I write a letter for them to give to the next priest so that they know who this person is, that it's handing off this person, Now, again, in today's times, it could be a phone call, hey, Father George, you got a parishioner coming to you, go ahead and receive them. They're all in good standing. In those days, it's much more difficult. You're going from Antioch down to Alexandria. Nobody knows who you are. So,
So if you're somewhere where there's, where there are multiple Greek Orthodox churches, or there's, I mean, here we just have three Orthodox churches. Do you do that for someone if they're choosing, let's say they maybe marry someone from that parish and they're gonna be part of that parish, or they get mad at somebody here and say, I'm gonna go there. Do you have to do that, or is
I
that
don't know
just
that you have to do that.
a courtesy?
I think it's a courtesy. It's a good courtesy. Even here between the three parishes, we communicate. If somebody's going to go from one parish to the other, right? We communicate between the clergy and to say, yes, this is okay with me. They're not leaving because they're upset with me, which is one of my big things. I don't like Father Philip. He's a bad priest. Well, go work that out with Father Philip.
Mhm.
So, don't come over here and start causing issues there. Council of Laodicea, Canon 3, he who has been recently baptized ought not to be promoted to the sacerdotal order. Later canons will actually say a minimum of 5 years. And so it says, just, give yourself time to be Orthodox.
Is that like, would that be similar to the same story in regard to when I brought up to you that one gentleman who converted to Orthodoxy, and it seemed in his story he's talking all kinds of things about Orthodoxy, but out of the whole thing, it just sounded as if he rushed,
Yes.
and that he was permitted to rush into clergy, and then during COVID, suddenly he has an epiphany, and now he's going back to being a Protestant, and it's like,
There is issues there, obviously, and should have been recognized prior to all that. But again, if somebody's in a parish for 5 years, you get a better sense of their disposition. So, yeah. So again, this is not a modern issue. This is an ancient issue. Canon 7, persons converted from heresies, that is, of the Novatians, Photinians, and Quartodecimans, whether they were catechumens or communicants among them, shall not be received until they shall have anathematized every heresy, and particularly, excuse me, that in which they were held. And afterwards, those who among them were called communicants, having thoroughly learned the symbols of the faith and having been anointed with the holy chrism, shall so communicate in the holy mysteries. What does that mean? If you're coming from a heresy, something that had already been anathematized by the church, you had to renounce that heresy publicly, which is similar to what we do in our modern catechumen or chrismation service. In the narthex, do you renounce this? Do you renounce this? Do you renounce this? Do you renounce this? It's similar practice there. And then with the symbol of the faith, that's the creed. We recite the creed then. So it's very, very similar practice to what was going on in those times. Canon, what is it? 44. Women may not go to the altar.
Unless we got no guys, and then they need to go clean.
They used to be able to go into the altar.
Technically, nobody's supposed to go on the altar unless you have a
Yeah,
purpose for being there. So,
I think
I thought it
nobody
was-
can step in front of the altar, right? Except
Correct.
the priest.
Correct,
You have to
except
go
the priest.
around it.
correct, you have to go around, go behind it.
That was that it wasn't just, oh, you had to have a purpose. But it was not only do you have to have a purpose, but you also still have to have the blessing of the priest to be allowed in.
Blessing of
or
the
by
priest or the
invite,
bishop,
or
yes.
by
He gives you the
invite.
purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I tell the story when I was first went to Greece in Ionian Village back in 1998. Staff went ahead of time so we could do orientation. And Sunday we went to the village church, and I walked in. And when I walked in, I became the third male in the entire building, other than the priest and the chanter. So there were 4 women in the altar serving as acolytes. And now they were all older women, may have been widowed. I mean, I don't know that I didn't question them, but there was nobody to serve. So the priest made best with what he had available to him. So
Something that is not exactly, but now it reminds me, back in the days when I was going to the church, they used to have these doors in the altar of grace. So during the priest, when he was putting the Holy Communion together, they were closing the doors. They were, if I remember correctly, they were saying that that's when the Holy Spirit comes down, and it's like a very, so it was a kind of a mystic,
Mhm.
always, like always we were thinking, what is behind these doors happening?
yes, well, that happens in the pre-sanctified liturgy still, right?
Mhm.
We close the curtain and the gates, the doors, and you have to be back there to know what's going on.
But there doors inside the altar, not just the great doors,
They were the doors, and you could not see the priest what he was doing. And you could
So
not,
just the royal.
you could not
Yeah.
hear the priest, the prayers that he was saying when he was blessing the.
as
Yeah.
you're clearly on the outside.
Yeah, you're waiting for
That's
5-10
how
minutes, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden the doors open and communion's ready.
Father Antonio did that before. He died.
Yeah. So it's a Greek tradition, but we see it, like I said, we see it more in the pre-sanctified liturgy of how that happens. I mean, start the service and the altar's kind of empty and close the doors, and I go and prepare the gifts and put them back on the protheses, and then we open up the gates, and a whole bunch of stuff has happened that none of you saw.
It also keeps you from getting distracted
So,
sometimes.
yeah. Next canon, the oblation must not be made by bishops or presbyters in any private houses. Simply that it's not a private event. It is a liturgia in Greek. It was the common public gathering. So, they can't have a private, one-on-one liturgy for some wealthy benefactor who doesn't want to be around the peons. So, Second Ecumenical Council only had 7 canons. I didn't really identify any of those. The Third Ecumenical Council had 8, canon 7. When these things had been read, the Holy Synod decreed that it is unlawful for any man to bring forward or to write or to compose a different heteron faith as a rival to that established by the Holy Fathers, assembled with the Holy Spirit in Nicaea. That is in reference to the creed. And so that's one of the canons of the church. And this was, again, we've talked about this, we preached about it, the filioque issue. That was specifically cited by the Orthodox Church for the filioque, that canon is very, very clear. No one may compose or, create something different. But those who shall dare to compose a different faith or to introduce or offer it to persons desiring to turn to the acknowledgement of the truth, whether from heathenism or from Judaism or from any heresy whatsoever, shall be deposed if they be bishop or clergyman, bishops from the episcopate and clergymen from the clergy. If they be laymen, they shall be anathematized. Okay, so again, important. And this was the Third Ecumenical Council. So Nicaea and Constantinople composed the creed, and the Third Council set it in stone, literally. Okay.
So how does that work in regards to dialogue with the Catholics? Because they claim that they support them. And not just filioque, but the faithful neglect.
So Yaroslav Pelikan wrote a book on the development of Byzantine theology. And in it, he talks about that dialogue. And ultimately, what the Catholics said at the time was, we're not introducing anything new. It should be self-evident that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Son, and that they really intended that when they wrote that.
If they had, they would have spelled it out.
I would say
They
it similarly that
You're talking about Greeks, they would spell that out.
if it's self-evident, then it should be evident. There should be evidence of it.
They don't seem to be bashful about putting out anything else in this thing.
Correct. So,
It is interesting that, a lot of times we say, look at how many sects there are in Christianity and in America, but from the beginning, there were little let me tell you how this is, and I'm gonna tell you how this is, because I'm gonna be the one that's gonna lead you.
Mhm.
And it, it was, could have been very fragile.
Oh, yeah, it was very
And like
fragile.
most of the saints that were priests or bishops, they get thrown out repeatedly. They get put in exile repeatedly.
Yep. It was a challenging time for, the first 300 years of persecution and then the next 300 years of
And I mean,
turmoil
it's
within the
still
church.
it is still very challenging.
In today's times, it's very challenging because we're not just dealing with sects of Christianity. We're talking about entirely different traditions and things like that. So yeah. The fourth council, Canon 1, we have judged it right that the canons of the Holy Fathers made in every synod, even until now, should remain in force. Okay, just letting you know. Very clear there. Canon 15, a woman shall not receive the laying on of hands as a deaconess under 40 years of age, and then only after searching examination. And if, after she has had her hands laid on her and has continued for a time to minister, she shall despise the grace of God and give herself in marriage, she shall be anathematized and the man united to her. So, for males, 35 was the minimum age for a bishop. For deaconesses, it was 40 years of age was the minimum age, and then they had to remain celibate for their entire lives. If they got married, they were anathematized. So there were deaconesses, but the rules for them were even more strict than for the clergy. So 21, clergymen and laymen bringing charges against bishops or clergymen are not to be received loosely and without examination as accusers, but their own character shall first be investigated. So it's kind of saying if you're going to accuse a bishop or a priest of something, you better have your affairs in order first, because we're going to test that before we do anything else.
That'd be harsh today.
Well, today it really kind of depends on the situation. Today we have a lot more ways to prevent evidence or present evidence. Where in those days it was hearsay for the most part. So this is a long canon, so there must be a reason for that. Following in all things the decisions of the Holy Fathers and acknowledging the canon, which has just been read, of the 150 bishops beloved of God who assembled in the imperial city of Constantinople, which is New Rome, in the time of Emperor Theodosius of happy memory. We also do enact and decree the same things concerning the privileges of the Most Holy Church of Constantinople, which is New Rome. For the fathers rightly granted privileges to the throne of Old Rome because it was the royal city. And the 150 most religious bishops, actuated by the same consideration, gave equal privileges, Isa Presvia, to the most holy throne of New Rome, justly judging that the city which is honored with the sovereignty and the Senate and enjoys equal privileges with the old imperial Rome should in ecclesiastical matters also be magnified as she is and rank after her. So in the Pontic, the Asian, and the Thracian dioceses, the metropolitans only and such bishops as of the diocese aforesaid, as are among the barbarians, should be ordained by the aforesaid most holy throne of the most holy Church of Constantinople. Every metropolitan of the aforesaid diocese, together with the bishops of his province, ordaining his own provincial bishops, as has been declared by the divine canons, but that as has been above said, the metropolitans of the aforesaid dioceses should be ordained by the Archbishop of Constantinople after the proper elections have been held according to the custom and have been reported to him. That is a lot of legalese.
That's
Let
very
me-
Greek. That's very Greek. You need to tell me that they meant something in another canon. They would have put this in there.
Okay, so let me boil that down. What this canon is stating is Rome was the head of the church when it was the imperial city. That's why it was the head of the church, because it was the imperial city. The emperor and the senate was there.
You mean head of the church?
Yep.
You mean what?
The first see.
Okay.
Constantinople, obviously, is established by Constantine, and it becomes the imperial city, and the senate and all that is transferred to the imperial city. What this is saying is the primacy of Rome was tied to the emperor and the Senate, the government. So similarly, since that was the case, and now we have a new situation, Constantinople, the new Rome, should have the same authority. And above and beyond that, what he's saying essentially here is, if you are a bishop of a certain area, you can ordain your own bishops. You're still in charge of that. But if you are anywhere else in the world, you must be ordained by Constantinople. And that is still to this day what takes place. So if you're in Africa and you're under Alexandria, they're in charge of their clergy in that patriarchate. In Antioch, they're in charge of their. What happens with America? Who has the right to ordain? Constantinople, based on that canon. Nobody else has the canonical right to ordain. And this is why there's the issue with the jurisdictions here in America. And it's not about, the Russians will say, well, we discovered it first. Well, that may or may not necessarily be true. Certainly Alaska was Russian and under Russian, but San Francisco was not, right?
That's the fourth council too.
Fourth council. So in essence, this is the anomaly we have, and this is not limited to America. This is true pretty much throughout the world, where people migrated to all throughout the world from various patriarchates, and they established their own churches and things like that. So this is not limited to America, but it is a challenge for the church in today's times of what to do about that. But clearly from the canons that outside of Constantinople, outside of any established diocese, Constantinople has the authority there.
Since the Russians kind of considered themselves a third Rome, do they use this to, in some ways, kind of justify their view of that relationship? And I know it's a contentious relationship at best, but
And they are descendant of Constantinople. Like,
Which-
it's like,
Rome, say again.
okay, the Russians see themselves as like the third Rome.
The third Rome,
Yeah.
yes, and that's. So
I'm not saying they're right. I'm
No,
just
no, no.
saying they're.
they
that's-
see themselves as that.
Yeah.
But here's the problem, right? As we discussed, Rome was Rome because it was Rome. It had the emperor and the Senate. Constantinople was Constantinople because it had Rome, the emperor and the Senate. Where Moscow comes in, what they say is when Constantinople fell, there was no more emperor, there was no more Senate. And we were free, you guys were not. So it's an interesting argument. I don't know that it holds any water, because this canon specifically is transferring old Rome to new Rome on a specific reason. That is not the same reason that the third Rome might
well, I can
exist.
understand the
So-
patriarchate of Rome, Moscow. Basically, Constantinople can't exercise any of its authority. We can in us, and then Russia also ends up becoming the one that actually champions orthodoxy from that.
But it was
point on.
Constantinople that established Rome, or
Or
Russia, Moscow and Kiev.
Yeah.
And we are the ones who relinquished our control to them. We gave them the autocephaly. It came from us. So now, if we want to follow all of that logic today, maybe it was the third Rome up until Vladimir Putin.
No, as soon as the Bolsheviks took control, they
Yeah.
wiped that line. out.
That line,
Yeah.
that lineage is no longer.
Yeah.
So any way you cut it, it's not a solid
But
argument.
that's why it's very contentious with
Yeah.
Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
the patriarch of Constantinople gave them autocephaly, right?
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct. So yes, and then that in the when that happened in that dialogue, in the papers written about the whole thing, that canon was quoted extensively as the authoritative reason that they could do that. So the Quinticex Council is 102 canons. Quinticex was essentially the fifth and sixth ecumenical councils did not proclamate any canons. So after the Sixth Ecumenical Council, the church got together and said, we probably need to do some canons. So they formed the Quintessence Council, which was exclusively to do canons. And that's why you have 102 of them. Go through a few of them here. That order is best of all, which makes every word and act begin and end in God. Wherefore that piety may be clearly set forth by us, and that the church of which Christ is the foundation may be continually increased and advanced, and that may be exalted above the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore we, by divine grace, at the beginning of our decrees, define that the faith set forth by the God-chosen apostles, who themselves have both seen and were ministers of the word, shall be preserved without any innovation, unchanged, and inviolate. Again, the first canon of that council essentially saying, this is why there's no change in the Orthodox Church. We're the Apostolic Church, and we even have a canon that says so. Again, whether we follow all these things is debatable. Canon 6, since it is declared in the Apostolic Canons that of those who are advanced to the clergy unmarried, only lectors and cantors are able to marry. We also, maintaining this, determine that henceforth it is in no wise lawful for any subdeacon, deacon, or presbyter after his ordination to contract matrimony, but if he shall have dared to do so, let him be deposed. And if any of those who enter the clergy wishes to be joined to a wife in lawful marriage before he is ordained subdeacon, deacon, or presbyter, let it be done. And so this is kind of just establishes that. Get married before you're ordained. Once you're ordained, you can't get married. Very simple. Simple rule. Canon 13, since we know it to be handed down as a rule of the Roman Church that those who are deemed worthy to be advanced to the diaconate or presbyterate should promise no longer to cohabit with their wives, we, preserving the ancient rule and apostolic perfection and order, will that the lawful marriages of men who are in holy orders be from this time forward firm, by no means dissolving their union with their wives, nor depriving them of their mutual intercourse at a convenient time. Wherefore, if anyone shall have been found worthy to be ordained subdeacon or deacon or presbyter, he is by no means to be prohibited from admittance to such rank, even if he shall live with his lawful wife. Nor shall it be demanded of him at the time of his ordination that he promised to abstain from lawful intercourse with his wife. So you can notice a few things by this time. Nowhere does it talk about bishops. Why? Bishops by that time were celibate, so it wasn't an issue of bishops. By this time also, the Roman Church has stopped allowing married clergy to be clergy, that they had to either depose their wife or they had to leave the priesthood. And the East was saying, that's an innovation. That's a strange practice. We're not going to do that. In fact, we're going to make it explicit that he's perfectly welcome to be married as long as that happened beforehand.
Approximately what time would that have been?
Quintessence Council. Hold on one second.
I'm sorry.
I was wondering if the first one that there was corrected.
Six-
toward the-
692.
Thank you.
So, okay. Next canon 24. No one who is on the priestly catalog, nor any monk is allowed to take part in horse races or to assist at theatrical representations. But if any clergyman be called to a marriage, as soon as the games begin, let him rise up and go out, for so it is ordered by the doctrine of our fathers. And if anyone shall be convicted of such offense, let him cease therefrom or be deposed. So basically,
Don't have fun.
don't get involved in horse racing. And I'm not going down to Tunica and all that stuff. And
So no skiing, no jet skiing, no snowmobiling, no four-wheeling.
we can do that.
Just don't involve horses.
Just don't get involved in theatrical representations. I mean, these sorts of things. If the party gets out of hand, it's time to go home. So, Canon 27, none of those who are in the catalog of the clergy shall wear clothes unsuited to them, either while still living in town or when on a journey, but they shall wear such clothes as are assigned to those who belong to the clergy. And if anyone shall violate this canon, he shall be cut off for 1 week. So basically, I'm supposed to dress appropriately, dress the part, which is why when I go to Greece, I wear my robes and my kalamafki, because that's what they are used to seeing there. If I wear this, they think I'm Roman Catholic, because that's what happens in Greece. Whereas here, we've been just instructed to wear, the collar. So just dress appropriately,
As your bishop tells you.
as your bishop tells you. Correct. What's that?
Do you have to wear the collar at all times?
Technically, not around my house,
Yeah.
but
But if you're out like grocery shopping?
technically,
Didn't specify how he wore it. He said it had to be worn in a pocket.
in essence, so there are interpretations of the canons, and the discussion about this one is fairly clear. You should be identifiable as a priest wherever you go. So, even here in Memphis, maybe especially here in Memphis, even if I don't necessarily have the collar in, but I'm in all black, people are pretty clear. Other than maybe being a super Johnny Cash fan, they have an understanding of who I am and what I represent. So,
But you don't have to wear it when you go hunting or anything.
no.
Or the horse races.
Oh, that would probably
Or the collar.
that'd probably increase the rate of getting deer. It's like, why you wear your collar? Like this, like this. I can bless the deer before I shoot it.
Yeah, when the warden comes by, it's a little.
It's like,
Let
let me hear your confession.
So, next canon 28. Since we understand that in several churches, grapes are brought to the altar according to a custom which has long prevailed, and the ministers joined this with the unbloody sacrifice of the oblation and distributed both to the people at the same time, we decree that no priest shall do this for the future, but shall administer the oblation alone to the people for the quickening of their souls and the remission of their sins. But with regard to the offering of grapes as first fruits, the priest may bless them apart from the offering of the oblation and distribute them to such as seek them as an act of thanksgiving to him who is the giver of the fruits, by which our bodies are increased and fed according to his divine decree. And if any cleric shall violate this decree, let him be deposed. So, again, boil this down. If you've been to the liturgy for the Transfiguration, you know that we do a blessing of the grapes at the end of the service. Okay, and I think this is probably what that's referring to, is that what would happen is instead of having a table off to the side and blessing the grapes at a separate time, they would bring the grapes onto the altar and putting them maybe even on the paten and in the chalice and distributing to the people. And they said, don't do that. Okay, set them aside as a separate offering. It's still okay. So this is why we still do this, but it's, separate from the Eucharist. Is it 42? Those who are called Eremites and are clothed in black robes and with long hair go about cities and associate with the worldly, both men and women, and bring odium upon their profession. We decree that if they will receive the habit of other monks and wear their hair cut short, they may be shut up in a monastery and numbered among their brothers. But if they do not choose to do this, they are to be expelled from the cities and forced to live in the desert, Eremus, from whence also they derive their name. So what the saying is, if you're a monk living in the city and you're associating with worldly people, doing worldly things, you probably shouldn't be doing that. You should go to the monastery where monks are supposed to be, and that'll be okay. But clearly that was an issue. And we sometimes have the opposite of that, where we want to go spend all the time at the monastery when we're not a monk. And that's also a similar situation. We should not be doing that either. So next canon, no woman may sleep in a monastery of men, nor any man in a monastery of women, for it behooves the faithful to be without offense and to give no scandal and to order their lives decorously and honestly and acceptable to God. But if anyone shall have done this, whether he be cleric or layman, let him be cut off.
Oh,
So
about Saint Nina. Sometimes they have a whole house designated for you.
correct. But you're separated from the nuns.
Oh, okay.
So
So when you're at the monastery, not the whole.
story, no, you can interact,
Yeah.
worship together, those sorts of things. But when it's time for bed, so a story I tell is a friend of mine and I went to a female monastery when we were in Greece, and up until bedtime, when we went to bed, we went outside the gates into a motorhome, and the nun that showed us the room then locked us in from the outside. So there was no way for us to cause any ruckus For the nuns.
Fire.
I know.
He'll burn holes.
So we did not burn a candle that night. Canon 50, no one at all, whether cleric or layman, is from this time forward to play at dice. And if anyone hereafter shall be found doing so, if he be a cleric, he is to be deposed. If a layman, let him be cut off. In essence, and we're not talking about playing board games. We're talking about gambling. That's what
Another
that's.
Texas Hold'em. Well, wait,
So
put chips, don't put money. Oh man, that's gotta ruin a lot of games.
next canon 55, since we understand that in the city of the Romans, in the holy feast, fast of Lent, they fast on the Saturdays. Contrary to the ecclesiastical observance, which is traditional, it seemed good to the Holy Synod that also in the Church of the Romans, a canon shall, immovably stand fast, which says, if any cleric shall be found to fast on Sunday or Saturday, except on one occasion only, that's great and Holy Saturday, he is to be deposed, and if he is a layman, he shall be cut off. This is why, even though we will celebrate Pascha, Easter at the same time this year, the starting date for Great Lent for us differs from Ash Wednesday, right? We start March 3rd. They start March 8th, I believe, something like that. And that is because the counting of the days of fasting, they count 6 days, which is 7 weeks plus 5 days, which is why you have it on Wednesday, right? Or 4 days, whatever. So that's the issue. Plus, they also count Holy Week. We don't. That's why we have a much longer fasting period. So the 5th is at Western Ash Wednesday. Thank you. So, but that's why the counting is different. It's also why we have cheese fairs, because we basically have that 8th week is not, no meat, but you can still have cheese and stuff. So that's really, really Lent begins, the fasting begins really at cheese fair when meat is no longer eaten, or meat fair. Okay,
But even during the Lenten season, the fasting lightens up on Saturday.
Saturdays and
Sunday.
Sundays, exactly.
Isn't that's what that's saying?
That is correct.
Except on Holy Saturday.
Correct. And technically, Palm Sunday and Saturday Lazarus are not Lent. So that's why we have the longer period. The next canon, it is not right to offer honey and milk on the altar. Obviously, that was a problem. Land of the milk and honey, figuratively, not literally. The next canon is not permitted to a layman to enter the sanctuary, holy altar, though in accordance with a certain ancient tradition, the imperial power and authority is by no means prohibited from this when he wishes to offer his gift to the Creator. So again, altar is really for the clergy only. Why do we have young men back there? Is because we hope that they will aspire to be priests when they are later, and it's a practicality issue. But again, you shouldn't be in the altar unless you have a purpose for being there. The next canon, we will that those whose office it is to sing in the churches do not use undisciplined vociferations. I love that translation. Undisciplined vociferations, nor force nature to shouting, nor adopt any of those modes which are incongruous and unsuitable for the church. But they offer the psalmody to God, who is the observer of secrets, with great attention and compunction. For the sacred oracle taught that the sons of Israel were to be pious. In essence, all the tradition that has been handed down by the church. So don't pull, American diva, your own mode that you want to offer. Canon, what is that? 80. If a bishop or presbyter or deacon or any of those who are enumerated in the list of the clergy or a layman has no very grave necessity nor difficult business so as to keep him from church for a very long time, but being in town does not go to church on 3 consecutive Sundays, 3 weeks. If he is a cleric, let him be deposed, but if a layman, let him be cut off. Miss church for 3 times should be excommunicated. Imagine if we followed that canon.
There would be no church.
Clearly, we don't follow that one to too much. The next one, those who do the destruction of their own souls procure and bring up harlots. If they be clerics, they are to be cut off and deposed, if laymen to be cut off. Not sure. Clearly it was an issue, but that one should be self-explanatory, self-evident. The next council we'll look at is the Council of Carthage. It seemed good that before bishops or clerics were ordained, that provisions of the canon should be brought to their notice, lest they might afterwards repent of having, through ignorance, acted contrary to the law. So in essence, if you're going to be ordained, you should at least know what the canons are. The next canon, that besides the canonical scriptures, nothing be read in church under the name of divine scripture, but the canonical scriptures are as follows. This is important in our discussion with the Septuagint. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua the son of Nun, the Judges, Ruth, the Kings, 4 books, the Chronicles, 2 books, Job, the Psalter, the 5 books of Solomon, the 12 books of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Tobit, Judith, Esther, Ezra, 2 books, Maccabees, 2 books. If you'll notice, that is more of the Septuagint version than the Masoretic text our Western Bibles have. And the Gospels will have the New Testament will have 27 books. So even in ancient times, the books of the scriptures were enumerated.
Like 27 or 26 of the New Testament.
27. So, let this be sent to our brother and fellow bishops, Boniface, and to the other bishops of those parts, that they may confirm this canon. For these are the things which we have received from our fathers to be read in church. And Boniface would have been the Western bishop in Rome.
Was it Bishop or Saint Athanasius who had actually collected what would eventually become the New Testament?
Saint Athanasius distributed to his clergy 27 books that we have. So he's the first to do that. But it was only specifically for Alexandria.
But basically laid the groundwork that he was the
Correct.
At the church would eventually, even though the one who did the most damage to Arianism didn't get to kill it precisely, but he did the most damage.
Right.
Also so happened to like.
Correct.
Okay.
The next canon
They must have been wanting to bring in, like you see, this new gospel was found and this was found. And
Correct.
there's always somebody that wants to bring something else in.
That's what they wanted. And our scriptures are pretty clearly written within a fixed period of time. Anything outside that period of time, even though it may be authoritative, is not scripture. So, yeah. That whosoever says that Adam, the first man, was created mortal, so whether he had sinned or not, he would have died in body. That is, he would have gone forth of the body, not because his sin merited this, but by natural necessity. Let him be anathema. Okay. We were created to be eternal. The next canon, likewise, it seemed good that whosoever denies that infants newly from their mother's womb should be baptized, or says that baptism is for remission of sins, but that they derive from Adam no original sin, which needs to be removed by the layer of regeneration, from whence the conclusion follows that in them the form of baptism for remission of sins is to be understood as false and not true. Let him be anathema.
So this goes contrary to the Catholic teaching.
They baptize babies.
They baptize babies.
No. The original sin.
Yeah. Well,
Are we just deal with the consequences? Or
well,
are we?
let's finish the canon here and see. For no otherwise can be understood what the apostle says. By one man, sin has come into the world, and death through sin, and so death passed upon all men, and that all have sinned. That the Catholic Church everywhere diffused has always understood it. For an account of this rule of faith, regulum fidei, even infants who could have committed as yet no sin themselves, therefore are truly baptized for the remission of sins, in order that what in them is a result of generation may be cleansed by regeneration. Meaning, right, not the guilt passed down, but the consequence of death. That by being baptized, the consequence of death now is no longer over them. So the Catholics, and the Catholic reference here is because at that time, there was no Catholic Church. It was still Christianity. There was no
Or just the
Split.
church.
the church.
But just to give some clarification, when saying original sin, our understand the Orthodox churches understand original sin versus the Catholic and Protestant understanding,
Correct.
they don't have the same meaning.
Correct. The guilt that is transferred is not part of our understanding of things. Notice, the quote from Romans here, by one man sin came into the world, and death through sin, and so death passed upon all men, and that all have sinned. So he doesn't say that sin is passed to all men. He's saying that death is passed to all men. That's what we have inherited as death. All of us are going to die. But we can't blame Adam and Eve for our sin. It's that we have sinned. So we have to be regenerated by baptism, which is the antidote to death. Okay? So I would imagine part of the reason this is here is they're starting to see, well, they're seeing in the West the development away from, the understanding in the East. So getting close to the end here. Seventh Ecumenical Council, Canon 2. When we recite the Psalter, we promise God, I will meditate upon your statutes and will not forget your words. It is a salutary thing for all Christians to observe this, but it is especially incumbent upon those who have received the sacerdotal dignity. Therefore, we decree that everyone who is raised to the rank of the episcopate shall know the Psalter by heart, so that from it he may admonish and instruct all the clergy who are subject to him. And diligent examination shall be made by the metropolitan, whether he be zealously inclined to read diligently and not merely now and then the sacred canons, the Holy Gospel, and the book of the divine apostle, and all other divine scriptures, and whether he lives according to God's commandments and also teaches the same to his people. For the special treasure, the usia of our high priesthood, is the oracles which have been divinely delivered to us, that is the true science of the divine scriptures, as says Dionysius the Great. And if his mind be not set, and even glad so to do and teach, let him not be ordained. For says God by the prophet, you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you, that you shall be no priest to me. So what that's saying is, essentially the bishops were being taken from the monasteries, because you've heard the Psalms. We talked about this when we discussed the Psalms. You hear the Psalter every 20 days. You go through the whole Psalms. If you've been a monk for 10 years, you're going to have it memorized, right? I mean, I've been a priest for 22 years. I pretty much have the 6 Psalms of the Orthros memorized, plus the 50th Psalms. So there's 7 Psalms just from being in the services. Okay, so by this time, that's already kind of the practice, and it's just giving instruction to priests, bishops. You should be reading the canons. You should be reading the scriptures. You should be reading these things, and your mind should be wanting to practice things that people can emulate and be holy. You shouldn't be not doing those things. So, and then the last one is Canons of St. Basil the Great. Our fathers did not think that killing in war was murder, yet I think it advisable for such as have been guilty of it to forbear communion 3 years. So again, it's a suggestion, and this is St. Basil the Great. Yes, he's St. Basil the Great, but it's his recommendation. These things are not necessarily followed by the church, but those are things that, again, bishops have these resources to guide them on how to guide their flock. In the canons, they should know them, and through them, they establish the rules that they're going to establish. So no, we don't take the canons and say, well, you missed the last 3 Sundays, I guess you're excommunicated. We don't do those sorts of things, right? So, oh, thank goodness for a lot of things. I mean, I think there's also one where a canon where a priest cannot be on the beach, which in Santa Barbara would have been very, very challenging. But again, if you've been to Europe and you know that sometimes it's not just that women might be in bikinis or things, they might be wearing nothing at all. So you don't want to be walking around in your cassock and cross on a beach in that environment. So you know,
Better to go to horse races.
the horse races, exactly. So, um, you know, so there's certain things we follow. I think even there's even a canon, I think, that says priests can't have short sleeve shirts. So, yeah.
Shame on you.
So these are the things that, these are the canons. They're guidelines, but they are put into force by the bishop. He's the one who has the authority to do it, and that's just kind of the bottom line. But you can see a lot of similar things in today's times were issues in those days. Some things a little strange that probably are not an issue much anymore. I think that first one from Nicaea with self-mutilation was probably not a common concern in today's times. But anyway, those are your canons. So